One.
Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, January 26th, and this is the Senate Government Operations Committee. And today we are going to be looking at and going the S-181, which is the, I don't know what the title is. We tend to have silly names, but it's municipal government. It's S-181. It would allow municipal government to do certain things. So what I would like us to do, I think, is the way the bill is constructed is does not give us the list. And Tucker, you had sent us a list before of all the within the three categories. Either you sent it or Karen sent it. Karen, did you send?
I believe Gwen sent it.
Gwen, okay, Gwen sent it. Do we all have that?
Not sure.
Unless I'm mistaken.
So what I'm going to suggest is that on our committee page, or Gwen, would you forward it to all of us right now?
Let me go find it. Sure.
Because I think that
Copy me and I'll paste it, or I'll put it up on the website.
Yeah, thanks. Because I think it's easier to use that list than to look at the way that it has to be drafted to fit into the different sections.
Just to be clear, the list wasn't updated to figure out what was included and not included in the bill. So there's a lot of stuff that's in there that's not in the bill. Does that make sense? Remember, we went through the list and we decided what to put in and out.
I thought that when we walked through the everything that was in the bill.
But there were three categories, but not everything in those categories were included.
Oh, okay. Well, if you can send it to us, I think this is, unless everybody else thinks it's easier to go through the bill itself.
I thought that's what we were going to do, Madam Chair, go through and check off the things we, just proceed. I thought we were going to do your patented check
Yes,
off.
that's my goal, but I think that just because of the way the drafting has to happen, it's easier to understand what we're actually doing by looking at the list. You had suggested bullet points, and that's what this list is. Unless anybody.
Well, I see the beginning of the bill. Numbers 1, 2, 3, like summarizes the things that the towns would be able to do. It's kind of like a list. I mean, it seems to, before it gets into the whole meat of the bill, which is where the confusion starts.
Okay. So we could actually, you're right, Anthony, we could use the 1, 2, and 3. I think that is in fact the list. You're right.
It's just not written like a list.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do it that way.
Yeah,
And
it's in paragraphs, but it's perfectly workable.
yes. So I would say let's start with number 1, which is number 1 is the ability of municipalities to adopt ordinances. And if you would remind us all of how ordinances are adopted and how they differ from some of these other things. Either Tucker or Gwen or Karen. Tucker, do you want to remind us how ordinances are adopted?
Sure. Tucker Anderson, Office of Legislative Counsel. Ordinances are adopted by the legislative body of a municipality. There is a procedure set out in 24 VSA Chapter 59 that governs first the notice process, how the ordinance may be adopted, whether it is civil or criminal, which is a requirement. When the legislative body adopts an ordinance, it has to designate specifically whether it's a civil or criminal ordinance. The opportunity for permissive referendum upon a petition of 5% of the voters. There is a delayed effective date built into the procedures for the adoption of ordinances, potentially unlike, for example, resolutions that may be adopted by a legislative body. It is a 60-day delay between the date that the ordinance is formally adopted and when it becomes effective. The time limit for permissive referendum is 44 days after the date that the ordinance is adopted. If a referendum is submitted, then the legislative body must warn either an item for the annual meeting or a special meeting to vote on the referendum, and that has to be done within 60 days. As for the content of an ordinance, the subject matter of the ordinance will be determined primarily by state law. That would either be general law or charter that describes the regulatory authority of the municipality and what they are allowed to regulate through ordinance or rule, which is something I've neglected to say. There are some rules that are adopted in the same manner as ordinances, and that's also covered by Chapter 59. And penalties that may be associated with an ordinance, either civil or criminal penalty, go up to $800 for each offense. That's the nuts and bolts of municipal ordinances.
So the ordinance, the way an ordinance is done is that the select board does it, but then the town residents have the ability to ask that it not be adopted by submitting a petition of a certain number of signatures. And then if they have that, then it goes to a townwide vote.
Correct.
Okay. Senator Polina?
I was actually going to say the same thing, that a referendum is in response to an ordinance. It's not another way of getting, it's not like there's two ways of getting an ordinance. One is the legislative body, one is the referendum. It's legislative body does it and a referendum could overturn it.
The referendum, the petition could call for a referendum, and then if the voters choose to vote it down, they have the ability. Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Tucker, I just have kind of a technical question, I think. Is there a difference between rule and ordinance in terms of the rule of law? Is one more recognized or not?
Excuse me for staying muted for too long. Someone's leaving a very long voicemail on my voicemail right now. No, there does not appear to be any difference in how a rule or an ordinance would be enforced. No difference in the rule of law, as you put it. And when we visited this issue back in November during the special session, we were discussing the difference between ordinances and rules. The general municipal law is not very clean in differentiating what the differences between a rule and an ordinance are. It seems to be just a stylistic choice between two different sets of statutes. And I will note that there likely should be some technical correction in the procedures governing the adoption of ordinances, because the civil ordinance section, I believe, does mention rules, but the criminal does not, or vice versa. So that likely should be cleaned up moving forward. But short answer, no, there does not appear to be a distinction in the rule of law between ordinance and rule.
Yep.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is 6 things that would allow, that currently are not allowed for municipalities to determine under general law. So this is saying that these 6 things, the select board would have the ability to pass an ordinance addressing these 6 items if they so choose. And those 6 items are, and we can go through them one by one, And here's where we would do the kind of check off. The first one is the installation of sidewalks. And Tucker, I don't know if there's more detail on that you need to, okay. It would just allow the installation of sidewalks by by ordinance of the select board.
So does this imply that today they would have to go through a charter change to make sidewalks?
Or a traffic
How-
study, or
How else could they do this?
I don't know.
That's ridiculous.
But we
I had
don't,
the same question.
so Gwen, do you want to answer that?
I think this is a technical correction, or we would see it as a technical correction because it's never been written into it. It's been implied by saying that you can regulate the use of it, but has never explicitly said installation. So this would just put it in there very clearly and clean it up. So there's no
Okay.
second guessing.
Okay.
Okay, so are we okay with that?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. How about implementation of traffic calming measures? And do you want to tell us, Tucker, where these can be installed, or the implementation or installation of them on town roads or on state roads?
This, at least in the bill, is built into 24 VSA section 2291 subdivision 4. And this deals primarily with the operation and use of vehicles and some motor vehicle regulation on town highways and within the municipality. So this would be part of, for example, the power to regulate the speed of vehicles or to erect traffic signs and signals within the scope of that municipal authority. So this wouldn't include, for example, state or federal highways. And traffic calming measures we touched on last time, you may want to hear some discussion on. Maybe Gwen or Karen have some more detail. But the range of traffic calming measures and devices is pretty large. It could include, for example, rotaries. It could be specific devices that are used to divert traffic, whether that's the use of specialized engineering for lights, or whether it's literally rerouting traffic from one lane diagonally across your municipality so that you have a quarter of your municipality where all traffic is flowing in one direction.
But it's only on town roads.
Correct. This subdivision would not apply to state highways or to, our federal interstate highways.
Would it be appropriate to ask a question at this point?
Sure,
Chair?
please.
Right before the language of implementing traffic calming regulations, there's the subtraction of the Title 24 reference. Can you explain the implications of that, please?
Where are you in the bill itself?
Line 6, page 3.
Okay, thank you.
I think that ties into another item on the list that deals
Okay.
specifically with vehicle speed. And that was to ensure that the overall regulatory authority of municipalities as it relates to the speed of vehicles was not going to be unintentionally encumbered by state law, because one of the items that's being requested, from what I recall, is municipal authority over the speed of vehicles on town highways. Without some,
I wasn't sure if that was tied to this or later, but it makes sense that you brought that up. So I'll talk about that other part later. Great, thank you.
So just to be clear, you can only do it on town roads, not state roads. So like Route 2, you're familiar with Route 2? Like it goes through Middlesex at some point. Middlesex couldn't say you got to slow down while you're in Middlesex because the Route 2 is a state highway.
I
Right.
think that's right.
yes, that would be under the jurisdiction of AOT, correct? Everyone,
Okay.
trans.
So does anybody have questions or concerns about this one?
No.
Not really.
No,
Okay.
All good.
Okay. So the next one is the
I think,
location.
I'm sorry, but I think what people will say is, well, you can't build a roundabout without getting other kinds of permission. You know, that seems like a major thing. Traffic calming could be a major thing in some ways. I'm not saying we shouldn't allow it to happen, but if you're gonna do a roundabout, you're gonna have to get, I would imagine you're gonna need state money and other kinds of state okays to do something as sort of major as a roundabout, right?
Why would you have to get state permission to do a roundabout on a town road?
I don't know, I'm asking actually, I'm just wondering out loud.
I mean, I think that you would have to get zoning permits and you'd have to have, what's it called? Where people agree to do it because it might impinge on their personal
I
property.
think you would need, design assistance, and generally they're somewhat expensive, roundabouts. So there are standards that V-Trans has for roundabouts. I think that we're thinking more along the lines of things like sidewalk bump outs and maybe barrels and crosswalks, so that visually it looks like you need to slow down, those kinds of things.
Speed
But
bumps?
even if you wanted to put a roundabout on Oak Street in Brattleboro, that you would have to comply with roundabout standards, and you might have to get some help from someplace. But if you decide
Just to be clear, in order to get funding, in order to qualify for any federal or state funding, you have to comply with the orange books and all those regulations. So there's already standards in
Right.
place that you have to meet in order to access those money. So you still want to build in compliance with those regulations.
yes, and you would want to build in compliance with design standards, but if you didn't want to get federal or state money, you just wanted to make a roundabout, why would we prohibit you from doing that? I mean, this doesn't address roundabouts, but my feeling is that if a town really feels that a roundabout on a town road in town or out of town would be beneficial and they want to pay for it.
Right. I think that's the key, is if they're willing to undertake it, and they'll get community input just by virtue of it being discussed at a select board meeting. So, I mean, nothing's going to happen without people paying attention to it. In fact, it probably will get more attention at a select board meeting than if it happens by the state. So I think it's fine. I think traffic calming is fine.
It doesn't specifically say
I
roundabout.
wasn't implying that I'm opposed to it. I was just raising the question.
Yeah. No, I get it, because it could be big, but it's also expensive. I mean, a town, some of these things are pretty expensive.
Right,
But we're just saying that they aren't prohibited from
Right.
doing it.
right.
Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just, I guess, puzzled by on line 7, the use of the word regulation and not, when I think of traffic calming, I think of like techniques or, ways to do it as opposed to a regulation. Like
Well-
the bump outs that Karen mentioned, that's a way to do it. It's not a regulation. It's just, maybe I'm missing the point.
It's to regulate the speed.
Right.
It isn't a regulation, it's to regulate the speed.
I think you're seeing the word regulation in a different meaning. Is that right,
Well-
Tucker?
It says to implement traffic calming regulations.
So if you use the roundabout as an example, again, the roundabout's not a regulation, it's a thing.
It's a measure. But this, I interpret
see.
regulations here as measures.
Sure,
So then why
Is-
not say that?
Yeah,
right, that's not what it says.
Tucker,
Each piece of the authority in the subdivision is regulatory authority to begin with. So anything that the municipality is going to be doing with any of these is going to be expressed through an ordinance, which is what we call a municipal regulation in Vermont.
Got it.
Regulation could likely be struck there and replaced with devices, systems, however you want to phrase it. Measures. In general, what I assume this is going to look like is an ordinance that says that on any street or on particular enumerated streets that after a traffic study are observed to have this many number of vehicles in this amount of space with this many crosswalks shall have X traffic calming measure. And then the municipality would move forward from there. In the case of the bump outs, it might be, this number of pedestrian walkways in this number of blocks, and then that would be the legislative body saying through its ordinance authority to their highway department or public works department, each one of these identified streets that meets this criteria is going to have this structure.
Okay.
And remember the population, that even if they do by the select board adopt an ordinance, doesn't mean that it is adopted, because the citizens still have the right to say, we don't want any roundabouts on any of our streets or any bump outs at all. And so we're going to vote against this ordinance.
Okay.
All right, so we're okay with that one.
Yep.
Yes.
I am going to skip over the next one because I think that somebody from A&R was going to join us, but I don't see the person here. Gail, do you
Oh,
remember?
Julie was going to join.
No,
us. No.
Gail, we got
Madam
a note.
Chair,
Yes,
Madam Chair, we were going to have the commissioner, but he is meeting with Governor Scott this afternoon and couldn't make it.
okay, so we'll put that one off because I think that we need to hear from A&R around that. Okay. That one's getting a red circle. Property management standards, do you want to explain what that means? And I believe we're on page 3, line 17.
Yep.
So does somebody want to explain what that means?
I can,
Please.
I'll try.
Okay.
The initial reason for putting this on the list was sort of to address the blighted properties issue that came forward with the Springfield years back. I believe there's also a provision that Shelburne had put into an ordinance, and then there's and correct me if I'm wrong, Tucker, I think Springfield still has their charter in the queue, right? So you'll see language in that charter that it mirrors, I don't know if identically, but very close to what Shelburne already has that deals with sort of addressing blighted properties. I can't speak to, the words chosen by Ledge Council for, establishing property management standards. I think if that covers the basis of dealing with blighted properties, that's what we were getting at. I'll leave it to Tucker to sort of explain why he chose those words, but we're getting at the whole idea of how do you regulate properties that aren't quite nuisances, but might have other attributes that are problematic to community development and increasing housing standards.
So Tucker, do you want to tell us why you chose those? And does that mean that a property management standard could mean that all buildings in this block have to be brick faced?
Yeah.
No, that's building.
So I believe the reason this is added is because one of the items on the list expressly asked for property management standards, but I may be remembering incorrectly, and I can't seem to pull up the list on the committee page. As far as what this language in subdivision 13 is establishing, the language here is fairly broad. You'll find that a lot of the language in 2291 does establish some fairly broad general regulatory authority that is then winnowed down by more express and restrictive language elsewhere in the Vermont statutes. Here, this would permit a municipality to have standards for property management that would be applicable to any premises in the municipality, regardless of whether or not in the judgment of the legislative body, the premises is dangerous to the health or safety of the public. So property management, fairly broad terms. If there are policy decisions that the committee want to make, you should likely further narrow and define what property management standards are.
Senator Clarkson.
So this aligns, as Karen and Gwen know, this aligns pretty well with what we're working on in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. We're working on carrots and sticks on blighted and vacant properties. And you all know and are familiar with our Vermont Housing Incentive Program, which we hope to codify in our bill S210, which you'll hopefully see on the floor next week, which codifies the VHIP program, which addresses vacant and blighted properties. We're also, VLCT has also brought to us, and we have discussed before, giving municipalities the right to tax and or otherwise create incentives for building owners to fix up their buildings so they aren't dangerous and hazardous for pedestrians, and safe for the community, and also productive and viable and used to their highest and best use within that downtown area, or actually anywhere. This could be anywhere in town. We're focusing mostly on on downtowns and village centers. So this does dovetail into a lot of what we're working on in housing, and would be a good complement to our work. So I just wanted to mention that this is sort of aligned purposes.
I am going to, before I go to Senator Collmore and Gwen, I am going to throw out something here, though, that this is, as Tucker said, this is very, very broad. This says that it can establish any property management standards that, and I think that was not the intent.
I hate to interject, but in the interest of time, it might be helpful. I think that if Ledge Council and the committee were to look at the current Springfield Charter and the Shelburne Charter that's already in place and has the language there, I can read it out loud just because I have it in front of me. But the relevant part in their charter reads, and they're both identical from what I understand, is quote, the charter says that the town will have the ability to adopt and enforce ordinances related to the cleaning and repair of any premises when in such condition as to impair the general appearance of the town, to be injurious to other property in the vicinity, or to be a health hazard, and to control the removal of rubbish, waste, and objectionable material therefrom. So that was sort of that language we were looking to. I think that second part of the last part of that sentence, or that provision that talks about rubbish, waste, and objectionable material, I think is already covered under solid waste ordinances. So I don't know if that's necessary, but for sure, the part that goes into the cleaning and repair of premises would be maybe helpful language to narrow it a little bit, but cover the bases we're getting at.
Thanks. I think that is helpful. I still worry a little bit about the general appearance of the town, because if my husband's family lived in Hudson, Ohio, and everything in the village had to have the appearance of being an old New England town, because it was the Western Reserve of Connecticut, I believe. And so everything had to have a certain appearance. So I do worry a little bit about how broad general appearance might be. That's Senator Polina.
I think it should relate to health and safety, which is part of what you're talking about. I think health and safety is what we're talking about more than appearance.
It's not what VLCT is getting at, because we already have that authority for nuisances and health hazards. This is getting at the gap between a zoning violation and those that are health and like public health violations. So you can, again, I think what Senator Clarkson was getting at is that there's a lot of buildings that are dilapidated that might be semi-unsafe, but aren't quite at the level of being condemned, that a lot of towns are trying to address but have no authority to.
Senator Colmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm wondering, current law, does it stop after the word public with a period? Maybe Tucker can tell me that. In other words, the conjunctive clause and to establish blah, 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 blah. But currently it ends at the word public. Is that correct? Okay.
That is correct.
Then I agree with the chair. I think this is a bit of an overreach, and it already says to compel the cleaning or repair of any premises that in the judgment of the body is dangerous. I think that's enough.
Senator Ram Hinsdale, did you have a? Oh, okay. So when you mentioned a zoning violation, is that something different? Can they not regulate something that has a zoning violation?
Yeah, theoretically, but most of the time, that's not how these issues can be really addressed. That's not how towns have traditionally done it. So I think that, and especially for towns that sort of want to issue tickets rather than go through the, Superior Court and the environmental court and go through that process, this would be like a $50 ticket for not, doing something, and then it accelerates if you have multiple violations over a period of time. So it's more direct enforcement.
When you read that list, there were 3 things on there. And the first was general appearance, and my brain went there, but there were 2 more after that.
The cleaning and repair of any premises is when in such condition as to impair the general appearance of the town, to be injurious to other property in the vicinity, or to be a health hazard.
Injurious to other property in the vicinity. That's, yeah.
Yeah, it has,
Yeah, Senator Clarkson.
the condition of these buildings has big impact on everyone else and on the immediate neighbors and on whether, so I actually support this. I think it's a little broad and I think we need to tighten it, but I support the effort behind this. And we may just need to hone the language a little bit, but I think there is a gap, and that Gwen has identified, and I support this. I just think we need to hone the language and make it perhaps a little narrower.
Maybe we could ask Gwen to work with Tucker.
Yeah, I would support that.
To pare it down just a little bit. General appearance, injurious to other properties in the vicinity certainly makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yes, Tucker?
As you move forward with considering this and the 2 charters that Gwen pointed out, I would add that there's at least 1 bill in the House that is dealing with this. And Representative Satkowitz has one of those bills, and it takes a look specifically at the intersection between municipal public nuisance authority and authority over salvage yards, which is one of the tangled areas that municipalities have found themselves in over the last few years, when a property is on the cusp of needing to be regulated by A&R, but there are specific statutory triggers there. And when they don't meet that threshold, for example, I think the statutory threshold is 7 abandoned vehicles. So you can have 6 abandoned vehicles on the roadside before you're regulated. And Representative Sakowitz's bill addresses that and looks at those sorts of situations where you have a de facto salvage yard or dump on a property that's unregulated and could be regulated as a public nuisance under existing law if municipalities were given express permission to do so.
So maybe in honing this language, we can draw on some of the stuff that's in there. And I'm just going to tell you a funny thing, which I probably shouldn't do here, but we built a house with our friends. I mean, we built 2 separate houses on 30 acres. And our friend's husband loved Peugeots. And so he had one that ran, and then he had 10 in various parts of, some of them were just a body, some of them, I mean, around on the property. And we could not convince him to get rid of them, and we threatened to turn them into A&R.
When I lived in Putney, when I lived in Putney on River Road, the police came to our house and asked if we had a junkyard permit because we had so many old cars in the driveway.
But they
In
were
front of
probably all registered, were they?
Yeah, well, most of them were being used.
Yeah.
They just didn't look so good.
We had, our Peugeots were kept in case he needed parts.
Parts, sure.
But yeah, but anyway,
I also think, this is an aside, but I've always been taught that the town of Craftsbury had an ordinance that says if you live on Craftsbury Common, your house has to be white, has to be painted white. So that was one example of where you talk about the brick fronts and whatnot. That town actually does have a rule that says your house has to be white if you're on Craftsbury Common.
Senator Clarkson.
I think that towns have the ability to set up historic districts, and within those historic districts, they are able to have ordinances, right? About, like shutters. I mean, Woodstock went through a battle of shutters in their historic district. So I think every town is now allowed to do, through some of those districts, allowed to set the ordinances they want. I mean, that going into the town, if you buy in that town, what you're getting into.
Sure.
So I'm going to suggest that Tucker and Gwen and Karen, whoever, work together and drawing language, if you want to, from the House bill or however, but to come up with some language around this one. Okay. And then the next one is the blighted property. So do you want to talk about that one? It's the maintenance of vacant and vacant or blighted property. So this gives them the ability to do more if it's determined vacant or blighted. So do you want to tell us what this would actually do? And it's on page 4.
This is just adding that just 2 more situations or incidents of which a town can take an increased level of control over a property. Right now, it's just uninhabitable buildings that are included on the list, and it gets a little, from our understanding, it gets a little gray, confusing, hazy to see whether blighted properties or vacant properties are included in the list. So we were hoping to add those 2 to make it really clear that vacant and blighted properties would also be considered. And this is also, and now that I'm looking at it, I think vacant's pretty clear. There's a definition of vacant. Blighted goes back to the question that you were all discussing at where's that standard at? So that might be something we have to delve into a little bit deeper, but at a minimum, we'd like to keep vacant on the list if blighted if we can't figure out the correct terminology for what blighted means.
So I think that Rutland had that issue a number of years ago, but Senator Collmore?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any problem with the word blighted, I guess, but I'm wondering, I want to say this in the best possible way. What business is it of the municipality if something's vacant? As long as it's being upkept, why does somebody have to be there? I don't understand the problem.
Maybe Gwen can tell us what the problem is with the vacant.
I think maybe there's a lot of, I can't speak exactly to one example, but I would think right here, the uninhabitable is a term to refer to the type of condition that a property is. There could be incidents where there's properties that have been left unattended, but might not be uninhabitable, that are just sitting vacant, and town wants to go in and address them. But I think this was a Rutland issue, so it might be best to ask Rutland to give a specific example, unless Karen can add.
No, and I'd be happy to do that. But again, my point is, if someone's keeping it painted, keeping the lawn cut, and there's no indication that there's any issue with the upkeep, but it's just vacant, I don't understand why that has to be included here.
Senator
I
Clarkson?
think one of the,
That's okay. Karen, you go first.
I think one of the issues is if a property is vacant for an extended period of time, and if, for instance, it's in a neighborhood and there can be a number of vacant properties, that actually is makes the neighborhood less attractive overall, and those are issues that need to be addressed.
That's also a safety issue. But I
Yes.
would also say that vacant, so in Woodstock, we have, one of the efforts in smart growth and in our downtown development and village centers is to try and make use of every space as much as we can in our downtowns and make them productive. We happen to have a building that is just allowed the top 2 or 3 floors. It's a big old brick centerpiece to be vacant. It's also in terrible shape, and it is a detriment to our income and the revenue of our town and to affordable housing. I mean, we need these not to be vacant spaces. So we need to be encouraging and coming up with ways to encourage building owners to not have vacant properties. So vacant properties can be a safety issue, and they can also be just a real impediment to our using our resources, and they're an impediment to housing. Vacancy is a problem. I mean, it's fine if you have a house and you go away for 6 months, that's one thing, but to keep apartments vacant where they could be being used is really a problem for many towns. And anyway.
I agree that it is a problem. I'm just not sure. We really have to define vacant, because I don't know that it's anybody's business if the top floor of a building is kept vacant, if it's kept up. If it's in good condition and it's kept up, and it is an impediment to development in the downtown area, but if it's safe and could be used and is kept up, why would we say, I'm sorry, but you can't keep that vacant? Anyway, Karen.
Well, the other point I wanted to make is, for instance, if you have a designated downtown or an area where you're trying to improve the economy in the downtown, and several commercial properties are vacant for a long time in that compact space, it really does affect the ability of the downtown to grow its economy. So there's the residential side, but there's also the commercial side.
No, I absolutely get that. I think that there would be a lot of owners who might be upset if towns started telling them, you can't keep that that storefront or that second floor vacant. Yes, Senator
I
Clark.
use the word encourage. I think we want to be in as many ways as possible encouraging the highest and best use of all our properties in a designated downtown and village center. So in our VHIP language, I believe is vacant and blighted. I can't remember. I have to go and look at it. But I think that there are vacant can be a real detriment to downtowns especially. And there are safety issues if they're not in downtown. So let's work on how we can make that work better. But vacant it's got some challenges.
I think that we need to we really need to define vacant, because if it's vacant and safe, what business is it? And I understand that the town would love to develop it or put housing in there, but if it's vacant and safe and inhabitable, then why would we put some expenses to constitute a lien on the property and to the same extent as taxes are assessed on the grand list. And I guess we need to be careful about how we define vacant. Gwen? Oh, I think Senator Polina had his hand up.
Well, just quickly, I have to say two things. I do think we have to define what vacant means, because does that mean 3 months, 3 years, and what is actually defined as vacant? The other thing is this: I thought there have been efforts in the past, Gwen may know this, or Karen, that towns have talked about taxing, like making people pay a fee, a tax, I guess, for if their properties are vacant. And I don't know what else the town could do. I'm not saying that's a good idea. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I don't know what else the town could do. They can't force you to rent something out unless they're going to fine you if you don't.
Well, they have that. I think they have that ability.
Let's let Gwen
So
or
we-
Karen.
We actually testified regarding that this morning in the Senate Economic Development Committee, that you could authorize municipalities to tax at a higher rate vacant and dilapidated buildings and blighted. So not just vacant, but vacant buildings that are dilapidated and a threat to the safety of the community. And that's not authority that towns have now. So.
I can see the ability to, if it's vacant and dilapidated
Yeah.
or blighted, to put a fee on it. But I'm thinking of a building in Bellows Falls where the second and third floors were vacant for a period of time, a long period of time, and they were not in bad condition. They were perfectly safe. The owners of the building just did not want to put people in there until they had a really firm idea of what they were going to do with that building. And eventually, those 2 floors are being used. But if it's that vacant for a number of years, so should we have been taxing them a fee because they had that vacant space that was kept in good condition? That's my concern here. So if it's vacant.
I would
Well-
tend to agree with you. And Senator, with respect to upper floors in old buildings, the cost of renovating them and putting in the ADA requirements, the elevators and so
Mhm.
forth, is quite high. And it's true in downtown Montpelier that there were upper floors vacant for a long time until developers were able to get assistance with putting in those kinds of required amenities.
Mhm. Yeah, Senator Clarkson?
Yeah. So that's why I think pairing this with VHIP is great, because I think that's what we're really hoping, that the Vermont Housing Incentive Program will really encourage that kind of an investment, because our housing needs we are at a crisis.
We are in a crisis with our housing needs. I get that. But that people might be able to access that to provide housing there. But there are some second floors or third floors that might want to have therapy offices or massage offices. They're not going to be eligible for VHIP money. So, but yet they have to come, if they renovate those, they have to comply with ADA requirements. They have to comply with, many of them are sprinkled. And so I'm just saying we need to define vacant in a better way, because I'm a big proponent of this bill. I will push for its passage, but I want to make sure that I do not think that private property owners should be taxed simply because their building is vacant. Yes.
I don't think we're going to fall on our sword over this entire provision staying or going, because we can always bring it back next year or the year thereafter. But if it makes sense, maybe pairing vacant and blighted, so they have to happen together, and then maybe putting a term like a vacant for 5, like vacant and blighted and and vacant for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Put a time limit on it. But if we can't get to a meeting of the minds on this, I don't think we absolutely have to move it, but it's something, especially if it's going to be covered in other bills coming out of some of the economic development committees and others, if there's other ways of getting to the underlying issue.
I'm okay with that. No, I'm not going to even go there. But I just am very, very concerned about people being forced to put anything into a building so that they avoid any kind of a fee on it.
Me too.
All right, let's, if we can come with a better definition of what vacant means. Or that
vacant and blighted. I mean, yeah, tying them or whatever.
Okay, how about the 6th one is the removal of damaged or leaking boats from bodies of water.
Oh, it's a big one, actually.
It is, and this came out of Colchester, I believe.
Sorry, yeah. So this, yeah, sorry, I was muted. This is an ask from the town of Colchester. They have had a few incidents, but one that was in the papers not terribly long ago, where they were waiting many months to get a boat that had been at shore, close to shore, for a very long period of time and leaking fuels and other such things into the waters. And the Agency of Transportation, which I believe was the agency that has purview over it, was not able to handle the situation for whatever reason. The comment I had asked the town manager from Colchester to sort of give me some background on this, because it was a very particularized ask. And the comment that I had gotten from them was that related to this language was that for Lake Champlain in particular, the lake is pretty shallow in a lot of places. And so that 100-foot shoreline marker that's sort of referenced in the bill could be a little difficult at times. And it's not there again, won't fall on our sword on it, but the 100-foot from the shoreline that wouldn't cover all boats that are there, because a lot of the times they could be at 101, 110, 120, but still be a problem. And then they also mentioned that if the language allowed for municipalities to impound the boat and sell it to pay for its recovery, it may help in cases where the boat has no value. So if that provision could be added, that would be helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. So, okay.
Well,
or let me just throw this out first. If the body of water is entirely within a municipality, then it seems to me that there shouldn't be any distance required, because
what's the rule on that? How far out does it? I mean,
well, if the body of water is entirely within the municipality,
but
then,
is it?
Huh?
Is it? I mean,
I said if it is entirely within the municipality, then why would you be concerned about how many feet from shore the leaking boat was? If it was right plop in the middle of it and it was 200 feet from shore, it seems to me they still should have the ability to remove it.
True.
That was so, and I don't know how many bodies of water are entirely within a single municipality. Probably not many.
I don't, for clarity, VLC didn't ask for the 100-foot, so I don't know if Ledge Council wants to shed light on why the 100-foot was
okay.
chosen.
Yes, would you like to, Ledge Council?
Absolutely. So recall that shared bodies of water, and of course the biggest body of water in the state, are under the state's control. And there's another state that has interest in that body of water. So not only is there a mandate for the state to have a regulatory interest over specifically the shorelines with Lake Champlain, there's constitutional public trust implications there. There's also interstate and federal complications around this. So 100 feet selected as a benchmark that could be adjusted. I'm not an expert on where the state's jurisdiction over multi-state bodies of water ends, or neither am I an expert on any Supreme Court decisions or other Vermont court decisions that have looked at shared bodies of water between municipalities. But 100 feet fell within some other shoreline regulations and seemed like a starting point for your conversation about where is the municipality's interest over some of these bodies of water. There are 2 attorneys in Ledge Council that could likely provide some feedback on the legal boundaries here. Anthea Dexter Cooper, who works on transportation, including some of the statutes around the waters of the state and the navigation of waters of the state, so boats, and Mike O'Grady.
Okay, so we'll have them talk to us, but the concept is we can decide we agree with the concept or we don't, but it's just a matter of figuring out the detail. Is that where we are, Senator
Yes.
Collmore?
And I'll yield to Gwen right after. The other thing that's not in here is any sort of temporal provision. So if I have a boat that starts leaking and the next day the town comes out, I mean, you got to have some sort of chance to mitigate it yourself, I think, before somebody goes after you. Maybe it's a week. I don't know what the right length of time is, but I think we ought to at least think about that.
Okay, yep. Well, it does say abandoned or damaged and leaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And abandoned is defined somewhere.
So Gwen,
I don't know if this is helpful, but I would think, and I could be wrong, that there has to be some enabling authority for the agency of transportation to have that similar authority. So it might not be something we need to do in ordinance. It could be something where that underlying law, assuming that it's statutory for Vermont, that in cases where the agency is unable or incapable of, removal, the municipality in that jurisdiction has authority, and then include the sort of language in there. But I don't know if that's just an idea.
yeah, that's something we could explore, yeah.
Because that's what we're getting at, is when the state isn't able to, someone should be able to. Similar to like salvage yards and junk yards, like, yes, there's laws at the state level, but sometimes the state doesn't always step in. So that's why towns feel the obligation to create their own ordinances where,
Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, I just would remind us that we have many bodies of water that it's not just Lake Champlain. We have Lake Memphremagog, and we also another country that has interest in this. Canada has interest in this as well. So I think this is a great provision, and it's abandoned. I think it focuses on abandoned or damaged boats, and I think this is great. And the ownership question of a municipality is a puzzling one, because of course, if you have a boat anchored on the Connecticut River, it's owned by Vermont, New Hampshire. So anyway, I support this provision. I think it's we can again hone it further, but I think it's good.
Yeah, I think that we've all agreed that conceptually we accept this, but we need to figure out, is 100 feet, where does the state jurisdiction end? What if they're shared by municipalities, which municipality? And potentially looking at just linking it to the ability for whatever authorization AOT has to do it, and possibly linking it there. And it does say abandoned or damaged and leaking. So it could be damaged and leaking, and the next day it gets pulled out. So we need to, I think looking at the transportation statute might be helpful, or regulation, or whatever it is. Okay. All right. So I think we went through those. And so we will hear about the storm drains, what we mean by property management standards, what we mean by vacant. And I guess we checked off one thing that we don't have to revisit. Good work here, committee. We did it. No, two. We crossed two. Installation of sidewalks and traffic calming. Okay. So do we want to move on to are we going to let me look here. Are we going to it's
171.
at 3 o'clock or
Right,
3:50?
we have ethics coming up.
Yes,
That's true.
at 3.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a little, we can just start the next one and at least understand what it is. And what it isn't, because I think there was some confusion and Tucker has answered that there was some confusion sent by Tim Meehan around this provision. So Tucker, do you want to walk us through this one?
Sure. Are you referring to section 2 of the bill?
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, I'm referring to 2 on line 15. Is that where? On page 1. Yeah, that would be section 2. Yeah.
Section 2 proposes to add a new section 2645A to Title 17. For reference, that immediately follows the charter general language in Title 17. And this would allow municipalities to vote to use authority provided by general law in lieu of specific authority that is granted in their charter. So the express language reads, a municipality may propose to cede specific authority granted by charter and instead use authority delegated in later enacted general law, provided that the proposal is approved by the voters at any annual or special meeting that is warned for that purpose. So to break that section down, because this is really the operative provision within this section, the municipality would vote to forfeit some special power, some special authority that has been given to them in their charter. They would vote to say, we don't want this power anymore because we would rather utilize authority that has been given to every municipality since the time we adopted this charter provision. So the legalistic terms there, they are ceding, they are forfeiting specific authority granted by charter and voting to instead use authority delegated in later enacted general law. And the reason for that specific formula is that it avoids 2 very tricky constitutional requirements that charters become entangled in. First, their statute, their state law, so the General Assembly has to put the letters down, choose the letters or the words in the charter. You have to pass an act to amend the charter, right? That's one component. The other component is that you are the only entity, the General Assembly, that is allowed to suspend law, right, that you have enacted. So that is why the municipality is selecting a later enacted law that has been granted to all municipalities. It's been granted to them too, but there's this restriction, which is they have a more specific authority that's been granted to them in the past. So the municipality here is saying, thank you, General Assembly, for giving us and all municipalities this authority. We had this previous specific authority that is preventing us from using it. We're going to vote to use the general authority, get rid of our specific authority, and rely on the general law. One component of this that I brought up last time that may be a good idea is some system where the General Assembly receives notice of the results of the municipal vote, so that when you do technical corrections bills or cleanup of the charters in the future, you don't have simultaneously existing charters that are confusing with the general law that's being used by the municipalities.
So I got an email. I don't know if anybody else got it or not. I forwarded it to Tucker, and there was some confusion about this. And the only example I could think of off right away was if a charter says we're going to have 6 people on our select board, but then the general law is changed here to allow the municipalities to choose how many people they want on their select board. They would not, if they decided that they would rather than use that authority and have 7, they wouldn't have to go through a charter change. They could use the underlying general law authority to change it without having to go through a charter change. Do I understand that correctly? Okay. Yes, Gwen?
But it's only for later enacted
Yeah,
law. So if a town chooses to move select board members, but then wants to go back to the language that's been there since 1964, they'll still have to go change their charter.
yeah. It's only for if we change anything we change in here, in later enacted afterwards. They can't, it isn't retroactive. It's moving forward. Yeah. Does that make sense to everybody?
I guess so.
I mean, it avoids them having to come with a charter change every single time they want to do something if it's already allowed by general statute for every other town. Gwen?
Sorry. Since we're asking questions, my question is for Tucker and Ledge Council is that assuming that a town were to take this provision up and they were to go through the voting process, go to later enacted law that's in general statute, but then let's say 2 years down the line decides they want to go back to their charter provision and say, hey, we want the town to vote again. We don't really like what we did 2 years ago. Can they resuscitate or reawaken that provision of charter and have a vote potentially to go back? Or is that off the table? They have to go through the whole charter process again to resuscitate what is now dormant in their charter.
My instant reading of the language here is that it's one direction. It allows them to go from their specific charter authority to the later enacted general law. There's no language here that would allow them to then revert back to their charter specific authority. But I'll look into that more so I can give you a more competent legal answer. And if that's something that the committee wants to consider, I'll look into it.
I think from VLCT's perspective, this whole proposal was to make it a lot more flexible because once a charter change is a charter change, you have to go through an entire charter change to change it back. So as is, it's not a perfect solution anyways, because it's only forward looking. So a town can't go back in time if they decided to change to either general law that's previous or their own charter that was previous. If there's a way legally, constitutionally to accommodate one or both of those, it would be ideal. But if it's not, it's still better than nothing.
Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I see that we're going to now learn how to do this in terms of process, about 5% of the voters, et cetera, et cetera. But is there any requirement that the municipality let anyone know at the state level that they've chosen to do this? No? Okay.
I think that was Tucker's suggestion, is that we need to put something in here that they have done it, not to notify us that they're going to do it, but that they have done it so that when they do technical corrections, they can update they can take that provision out of the charter
Okay,
or correct it, however they would do that. Is that right, Tucker?
That is correct.
okay, thank you.
And that makes sense. All right, are we okay with this? Putting it in the notification to the state.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So committee, do we want to jump into the next section, or do we want to take a 10-minute break here, 15-minute break, and then come back at 3?
Sure.
Sure what? That was a question, this or this. It isn't
I
a
would-
sure answer.
I would love a break.
Okay.
Or Brian. I understood what it meant.
I did too, but I just had to give him a hard time. I knew exactly what he meant.
He is keeping, single-handedly keeping